On January 2nd, 1935, a young man walked into the hotel President in Kansas City and checked into room 1046. He carried almost nothing with him. No suitcase, no spare clothes, just a comb, a brush, and a tube of toothpaste. He asked the maid to keep the lights off, leave the curtains closed, and never lock his door because a friend named Don would be visiting. 3 days later, hotel staff found him barely alive, beaten, stabbed, tied up, and covered in blood. Before he died, he refused to name the person responsible. Nearly 90 years later, what happened inside room 1046 remains one of America's most unsettling unsolved mysteries. The guest signed the register as Roland T. Owen. Witnesses estimated he was somewhere between 20 and 35 years old, with brown hair, a scar across his scalp, and a cauliflower ear that suggested he had once been a boxer or wrestler. Despite checking into an upscale hotel, he brought almost none of the belongings a traveler would normally carry. The hotel's maid, Mary Soptic, was assigned to room 1046. From the moment she entered, she sensed something wasn't right. Owen sat quietly in the darkness, refusing to let her turn on the lights. Even in the middle of the afternoon, the curtains stayed shut. He appeared nervous, constantly listening for sounds outside the room, as though he expected someone to arrive at any moment. Later that day, Mary returned to deliver fresh towels. Owen was lying fully dressed across the bed, still in complete darkness. On the bedside table was a handwritten note. It read, "Don, I will be back in 15 minutes. Wait." Mary thought little of it and left. The following morning, she noticed something strange. The door to room 1046 was locked from the outside. Yet Owen was still inside. Someone else had locked him in. While Mary cleaned, the room's telephone rang. Owen answered. She overheard only his side of the conversation. "No, Don, I'm not hungry." A pause. "No, I said I'm not hungry." His voice sounded tense, almost fearful, as though he was refusing an order rather than declining a meal. Later that afternoon, Mary returned again. This time, she heard 2 male voices coming from inside the room. When she knocked, a rough, unfamiliar voice answered through the door. "We don't need any towels." That evening, guests staying nearby reported hearing shouting, profanity, and the voices of both a man and a woman coming from the area around room 1046. No one realized those would be the last sounds anyone heard before the nightmare began. The following morning, January 4th, the hotel switchboard operator noticed something unusual. The telephone in room 1046 had been left off the hook for an extended period. A bellboy was sent upstairs to investigate. As he stood outside the locked door, he heard a weak voice from inside. "Come in. Turn on the lights." He tried the handle. Locked. Assuming the guest was drunk or simply too weak to get out of bed, the bellboy called through the door, asking him to place the receiver back on the hook before leaving. About 90 minutes later, the switchboard showed the phone was off the hook again. This time, another employee used a passkey to enter. The room was almost completely dark. Only a faint beam of light from the hallway illuminated the bed, where Owen lay motionless beneath the blankets. The employee noticed the bedding appeared unusually dark, but assumed the guest was asleep. He returned the telephone to its cradle, quietly closed the door, and walked away. It would prove to be a terrible mistake. Just 2 hours later, another bellboy returned to room 1046. The moment he stepped inside, he knew something was horribly wrong. Roland Owen was no longer in the bed. He was on his hands and knees near the entrance, struggling to crawl toward the door. Blood covered the walls, the bed, and the bathroom floor. Owen himself was soaked in blood, barely conscious, and fighting to stay alive. Police and an ambulance were called immediately. At the hospital, detectives asked the only question that mattered. "Who did this to you?" Owen quietly replied, "Nobody." Moments later, he claimed he had simply fallen against the bathtub. No one believed him. Doctors discovered he had suffered a fractured skull from repeated blows to the head. He had been stabbed multiple times in the chest, one wound puncturing a lung. Deep bruises covered his body. Ligature marks around his neck, wrists, and ankles showed he had been tightly bound with cord. Medical examiners estimated the attack had happened 6 to 7 hours earlier. That meant, while hotel employees heard the phone off the hook, while guests walked the hallway, while people unknowingly passed room 1046, Roland Owen had been lying inside, slowly bleeding to death. Shortly after midnight on January 5, 1935, he died without ever identifying his attacker. The investigation only became stranger from there. Police found no murder weapon. Every personal belonging Owen had brought with him had disappeared. 4 fingerprints were recovered from the overturned telephone stand, believed by some investigators to belong to a woman. Then came the biggest surprise of all. There was no record of anyone named Roland T. Owen. The victim had checked into the hotel under a false identity. Months passed with no leads. Then, a year and a half later, a magazine article about the unidentified victim reached a woman named Ruby Ogletree. The moment she saw the photograph, she recognized him. The young man in room 1046 wasn't Roland Owen. He was her 17-year-old son, Artemis Ogletree. Ruby Ogletree revealed something that made the mystery even more disturbing. After Artemis had already died, she received several typed letters, supposedly written by her son. There was just one problem. Artemis didn't know how to type. The letters also sounded nothing like him. Their slang-filled language and casual tone were completely out of character. Whoever sent them wanted Ruby to believe her son was still alive, even though he had already been murdered. Then another bizarre twist emerged. When newspapers announced that the unidentified victim would be buried in a pauper's grave, an anonymous man contacted the funeral home and offered to pay for a proper funeral. Soon afterward, a bouquet of flowers arrived with a simple card that read, "Love forever, Louise." A second anonymous caller instructed the funeral director to bury Artemis at Memorial Park Cemetery, saying he should rest near my sister. The caller also claimed Artemis had gotten into a jam after jilting a woman he was engaged to. Before hanging up, he left investigators with one chilling sentence: "Cheaters usually get what's coming to them." The identity of that caller has never been discovered. So what really happened inside room 1046? The first theory points to the mysterious Dawn. Witnesses had reportedly seen Artemis staying at another Kansas City hotel, with a man matching Dawn's description before checking into the hotel president. Some investigators believe Dawn lured him to room 1046 before carrying out the brutal attack. But despite years of investigation, police never identified anyone named Dawn connected to the case. A second theory suggests more than one person was involved. On the night of the murder, a hotel elevator operator reported seeing a well-dressed woman searching for a room on the 10th floor. Guests also reported hearing a woman's voice arguing nearby, and the unidentified fingerprints recovered from the telephone stand may have belonged to a female. If true, Artemis may have been ambushed by multiple attackers. The final theory centers on revenge. The anonymous phone calls, the roses signed Louise, the references to a sister, and the caller's comment about cheating all suggest Artemis may have been targeted over a failed relationship. Some believe a jealous fiancé, or someone acting on her behalf, planned the meeting that ended in his murder. Then, decades later, the mystery grew even stranger. In the early 2000s, a researcher studying the case received a call from someone who claimed they had discovered a box filled with old newspaper clippings about the murder. The caller said the box also contained another item connected to the original investigation, something mentioned in early reports, but long forgotten. They never revealed what it was. They never called back. And whatever that object was has never been made public. Nearly 90 years later, the murder of Artemis Ogletree remains one of America's most baffling unsolved mysteries. Who was Dawn? Who locked the door to room 1046? Who sent the fake letters? And who silenced a 17-year-old boy before he could tell the truth? What do you think happened? Drop your theory in the comments. And if you want more cases like this, subscribe to Mystery Minute. We'll be here every week, digging up the truth.